guys. We're with Minmaxer, who, I'm sorry, you just told me this. You took third in the tournament?
Yeah, I ended up third.
Third in the Duelist Melee that happened last Tuesday, week one. So, you already got some serious points to qualify for the end of the season. You were playing a Tempo Argeon deck, which is definitely a deck that we've seen a lot in the past couple months and remains pretty strong. So, why'd you choose this for the melee, and what kind of field were you hoping to run into?
Well, I wanted a deck that would have a good matchup kind of across the board. I wasn't sure what I was going to see, so I wanted a deck that had a good matchup overall. I played a similar list on the ladder with one of my accounts, and the other account I played Song High, which I feel also is a very good across the board matchup. But when it came to playing sideboard lists, I was concerned about playing Songhai with sideboard. It's very combo centric, so you can't really board in a lot of cards, and some of the hate cards can be quite strong. So I felt that going with Lionar gave me lots of options while still having a very good overall matchup.
Right, yeah, that's interesting. So the decks that tend to be tighter are a little bit harder to sideboard with because you don't really have the space to cut the cards.
Right. Everything that you bring in, you have to take something out that's been there for a reason. Where a deck like Tempo Argeon, that's just a collection of really strong cards, so you can sub in another strong card that's good in particular matchup and take something out that's not as good in that matchup, and you're still playing a collection of really strong cards.
Right, yeah. So yeah, you chose to go with kind of the very consistent all three of version that we've seen. You went with the Primus Fist. I mean, kind of the flex slots, maybe a Primus Fist, Lightbender, and Lakian. So what pushed you towards those specific choices that are maybe kind of the tech slots, or the not tech, but kind of the flex slots in Tempo Agion?
So this list is based off one that Solifid was playing a couple seasons ago, and that's part of the reason for all the threes. The other reason is I just wanted to make sideboarding easy, so I just had to make sure everything was three, and then I knew I had the right deck list. Um, the initial list didn't have Scintillas or Trinity Oath. It was playing Sojourner and Arclight Regalia. So I replaced first. I guess I brought in the Trinity Oaths, but I couldn't play Trinity Oaths, Arclight Regalias, Holy Immolation, and Lakian. It was just too many 4-drops. So I wanted to cut a 4-drop, so Regalia ended up going out, and then I had a lot of draw cards, so I took out Sojourner and put in Scintilla, which I was uncertain about, but I expected a lot of Magmar and Leonar, and it's quite good in both matchups. Sojourner runs into the problem where it always gets natural selectioned, so it dies a lot, and I didn't feel like I needed that much cards. And I didn't want to have to play too much healing in my sideboard, so having Scintilla main deck kind of um, did that for me without. It was kind of a semi pre-board against very aggressive decks.
Right, that makes sense. And also, since you said you're looking for a deck with good matchups across the board, having something like Lightbender in your main deck means that you have a lot of different types of threats covered, so it doesn't tax your sideboard as much to have dispels like some of the other decks that aren't going to run those main deck.
Right. And another option instead of Lightbender is Sunbloom or Shroud. I like playing Shroud a lot more when it was a 2-2, but the 1-1 just has no impact. Dying to Scorn is annoying. When it's a 2-2, it survives Scorn. So that was nice. Um, I'm still torn on Lightbender. It's a better body, but it's really clunky sometimes being a 4-drop. So I can see that being any of the 3 dispel options, just depending on preference.
Right. Yeah, and it does. I mean, there are some minions in your deck that it can hit and have a negative effect on, so you do have to position it around kind of your Zeal minions, and be careful of those. But I mean, the effect is pretty huge when it hits a couple different things.
Yeah.
So then, I mean, we move to the sideboard, which is going to be kind of where you start making some more interesting choices. So just kind of card by card, like how did you arrive at these different things, and what matchups were you kind of targeting with each of these cards?
So I played in Sunday Night Fights and I lost to an Abyssian Swarm deck. So that's part of the reason for Tempest. Tempest is good in a few other matchups too. Um, it's pretty good against Songhai, and I guess Songhai and Swarming lists immediately. As far from Martyrdom, I wanted some form of hard removal. That's one thing that Leonard can struggle with, especially in the mirror matches or semi-mirror matches. Um, when you have Leonard versus Leonard, whoever has the slightly bigger list is favored. So that's why I wanted some options to kind of go bigger. Um, that's where Circle of Life and Ironcliff and Elix come in. Circle of Life also is very good against the heavy aggro decks. Um, I also bring it in against Cast a lot of times because it can kill Kaleno at range, and in that match you're often doing a lot of damage with your own general, and you don't want to die to back-to-back revs or something like that. So it's good to have some healing. You can also kill an early jug or something like that too. Decimate, that was kind of both a surprise card, but it's useful against Songhai. It's useful against Cass, though I don't always bring that in. Depends how people play their Kalenos. Um, you can catch Vet with it too, which is another option. It's pretty good against Abyssian Swarm. It's a card that's best when people don't know it's coming, and I having it in my deck, I always know when it would be coming, and I'm always playing minions close to a general, so it's a good option to have. Um,
Then you have a few big provoke minions kind of
yeah,
as a top
so
end.
they're Songhai has difficulty dealing with them, and if I'm playing against another mid-range deck, I want to go slightly bigger than them. Um, but they're kind of dependent on what's going on. Like I generally don't bring in Iron Cliffs against Magmar because they died a Plasma Storm, but Elix is quite strong. So I the sideboard kind of came from my background in Magic, where I play a lot of mid-range decks there, and it's what cards are going to kind of fit my play style and can just swap out for weaker cards in a particular matchup. So all the cards in the sideboard are particularly strong in some situations, so I can just kind of swap them card for card with things in my main deck to improve different matchups. There wasn't any particular decks that I was particularly hating towards. Like um, I didn't think there'd be mech decks, so I didn't put any sideboard cards towards that.
Right, yeah, we don't see like the crossbones, kind of like the heavier hate cards. You're just kind of going
Yeah,
for just like powerful cards that are a little better in matchups than others. So when you are sideboarding, how do you decide like what cards you want to take out? I mean, given that your main deck is generally cards that are just pretty solid overall, how do you decide where you're taking out cards and kind of keeping the general strategy of your deck intact?
right. So there's certain cards that are never gonna come out probably, like the spells, Immolation or Trinity Oath. Those aren't coming out. Um, the 2-drops are pretty much safe. Um, so some cards that are not good in particular matchups are Arclight Sentinel. I boarded that out several times. I played a couple cast matchups and they don't do a lot there. You're kind of boarding out the more situational cards.
Right.
So, and or slower. Like if I'm playing against a heavy aggro deck, I'm probably never gonna be using my Lycians. So I want something that's more directly impactful on the board and also lets me catch back up. So that's why Circle of Life is coming in. What's let's see what's something else that no one comes out. Oh, I might have boarded out a couple lions against my Vath opponent. I don't remember if I did or not, but their celerity loses something if all the minions that you're facing have 3 attack, minions in general, because you only ever get 1 attack from it. A lot of the times slow would come out. Not all 4 of them, but 1 or 2. If you're playing a really attrition-y matchup, you don't want to draw a card that doesn't do anything on its own. If it's a very tempo-oriented game, it's fine, but if it's going to be a really long and drawn out, slow doesn't. It's not a whole card. It's kind of like half a card, so it's a card that you can shave 1 or 2. I don't think I ever sideboarded more than 3 or 4 cards, because a lot of the cards that are there are for a reason. Some of them would be pretty tough to cut. Like I can't see myself ever cutting Tigers or Silverguard Knights. Generally, I need some Dispel. Could maybe shave a Lightbender. The Windblade Adept would never come out. The spells never come out. Maybe a Blood Tear or 2, but you can't cut all of your 0 and 1 drops because you need to be able to play Immolation early sometimes. So a lot of it depends on the matchup and how you expect them to play and what cards you feel you're weak against, and then bringing in an answer to them. So Circle of Life came in a lot.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I also played a lot of Magic, and I know one thing that we when I was doing tournaments, was always kind of discussed in the the articles and stuff was like having kind of a sideboard plan before matches. So would you say
Right.
that when going into each matchup, you kind of knew beforehand what you would take out and would be adding in, or did you kind of just do it on the fly as the match progressed?
Um, I generally had an idea beforehand because each of the cards that were in there, they're kind of like, okay, this will be good for against these 2 or 3 decks. So each card in there ideally has multiple decks that it's good against. But some of the lists you can play, or generals you can play widely different lists. So you have to kind of adapt to what you see. For example, Monk Business was playing what's
He was playing
the
Drogon Vath.
yeah, he was playing
Yeah.
Drogon Vath. So normally I wouldn't bring in Circle of Life, but I needed a way to kill his Drogons and also heal in that matchup, which is semi-important already, but he could burst so hard that I needed a way to deal with that. He also was playing I lost the first game to Fractal Replication on Sunsteel Defender, so I needed a way to answer Sunsteel Defender before I could get totally out of hand. So I brought in Martyrdom, which is something I wouldn't normally bring in against Vath, but the fact of having 3 Sunsteels to deal with, I had to kill them before I got to that. So that's definitely a matchup that ended up sideboarding differently than I thought I end up would, because he was playing more of a control combo version of Vath than the kind of typical aggro lists that you see.
Yeah, we actually recorded a video earlier today. So he was talking about the fractal replications on sun steels and stuff like that. So it's interesting to get both sides of that. And just like just a last question before I take all of your time. The after like the second game, assuming you guys split, you have the opportunity to change things up in the third game. Was there ever a situation where you kind of altered your sideboarding because of the opponent's sideboarding? Like maybe you saw some Grove Keepers, so took out some of the provokes that you would side in, or anything along those lines? Or do you generally stay consistent between games 2 and 3?
Interestingly enough, all my matches were 2-0, so that didn't come up. But I definitely have done that in the past, especially playing Magic, where you'll see a sideboard card that you weren't expecting, and then you have to adjust your sideboard plan based on that. So that's definitely a real possibility. If I saw someone bring in 3 Grove Creepers, then yeah, I might take out my Silver Guards, which is something I wouldn't normally do, but I might adjust for that for sure.
Right. Yeah. One thing I kind of actually when I was playing in the melee before I got quickly knocked out, I was thinking that one of the things about Duelist and kind of Hearthstone and these games that aren't Magic is that you don't have kind of a side choice like play or draw. So I know sometimes that sideboarding in Magic would kind of change depending on if you had play or draw, and it's interesting that's not a consideration in this game, but maybe in the future, if this would become a game mode, that might actually become a kind of something to think about,
Yeah,
because
for sure.
if they ever institute some kind of choice, because some things like you want to have your 2 drops, or do you want more 3 drops if you're going to be player two, or something like that. Well, thank you for taking your time. Congratulations for doing pretty well in the tournament, and and thank you for kind of discussing how to sideboard, because it's definitely something that if you just play the ladder, you're not going to get a lot of opportunities to really get into, and then you kind of jump into this tournament and you kind of have to play on the fly. So I think experience from other games definitely is a huge boon for someone like you. Well, thank
Yeah, for
you,
sure.
and
Thanks
have
for
have
having
a
me.
good night. Of course,
It was fun.
it's fun.